They thought I was helpless. That one word, whispered between two sons I had given my life for, was meant to be my epitaph. A quiet little label for the woman they would discard. They didn't know it then, but that single word wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It was the spark that lit the fire, and in the ashes of the mother they thought they knew, someone else was born. Someone who understood that love could be a debt. And debts always come due. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel small by the very people you built up, then you know the unique kind of pain I'm talking about. Stick with me, and I'll tell you how I went from being a helpless mother to the sole owner of my children's futures. It's a long story, but I promise you, the ending is worth it. And if you find yourself nodding along, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It tells the algorithm that stories of justice deserve to be heard. Part 1. The Anatomy of a Betrayal. The silence in my small apartment was a living thing. It had weight. It pressed down on me, filling the spaces where laughter and the clumsy footsteps of little boys used to be. For 30 years, this home, this life, had been a whirlwind of motion, a chaotic symphony of sacrifice dedicated to two people, my sons, Adam and Josh. It started, as these things often do, with a man who promised forever and delivered about a decade. When he left, the boys were just 8 and 10. I remember looking at their bewildered faces, their eyes searching mine for an explanation I didn't have. In that moment, I made a silent vow. I would be enough. I would be their mother, their father, their safety net, their launchpad. I would become whatever they needed me to be, and I would do it without complaint. My life became a series of subtractions. I worked as a nurse, a noble profession that paid just enough to be constantly worried. So I took on more. Double shifts became my norm. The hospital corridors, sterile and smelling of bleach, became more familiar to me than my own living room. I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, fueled by lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup and the burning need to provide. My hands, once soft, became chapped and calloused from 1,000 washings, 1,000 procedures, 1,000 moments of caring for strangers while my own boys were at home with a babysitter. I remember one Christmas, the boys were teenagers. Adam wanted a new computer for his graphic design ambitions, and Josh needed a top-of-the-line trumpet for the school band. The total was more than 2 months of my mortgage. I didn't even hesitate. I sold my mother's jewelry, the string of pearls she wore at her wedding, the simple gold locket I'd cherished since I was a girl. I told the boys I'd gotten a big Christmas bonus. Watching their faces light up as they tore open the wrapping paper was my bonus. It felt, at the time, like the most worthwhile transaction I had ever made. Vacations were postcards from friends that I'd pinned to a corkboard. New clothes were things other people bought. My dreams, the small, quiet ones of seeing the ocean from a balcony or learning to paint, were packed away in a dusty attic in my mind, to be revisited someday. Someday, after the boys were through college. Someday, when they were settled. Someday. The biggest sacrifice came when it was time for their universities. They both got into good schools, schools that promised them a future I could only dream of. But the price tags were staggering. I had a modest retirement fund, a 401k I had dutifully contributed to with every paycheck. It was my someday fund. It was the money for the quiet balcony by the sea. I sat in a sterile financial advisor's office, the air smelling of paper and quiet desperation. The man across the desk, Mr. Gable, had kind eyes but a firm voice. "Deborah," he said, sliding the paperwork toward me, "are you absolutely certain about this? Cashing this out. There are significant penalties. And once it's gone, it's gone. This is your future." I picked up the pen. It felt impossibly heavy. I could feel the rough texture of the plastic against my fingers. I looked out the window at the gray sky and pictured Adam's confident stride, Josh's infectious laugh. I wasn't just signing a form. I was trading my future for theirs. A straight swap. I took a deep breath, the smell of recycled air filling my lungs, and I signed my name. The ink was a deep, definitive black. "They're good boys," I told Mr. Gable, more to convince myself than him. "They'll make it all worthwhile." And for a while, it seemed like they would. They graduated with honors. Adam, sharp and ambitious, went into business. Josh, charismatic and creative, went into marketing. They landed impressive jobs in the city, an hour's drive away. At first, the calls were frequent. They'd tell me about their new apartments, their promotions, the fancy restaurants they were trying. I was so proud my heart felt like it would burst. Every ache in my back, every missed holiday, every penny pinched, it was all vindicated. I had done it. My boys were a success. But success, I learned, has a way of erasing the past. The calls became less frequent. "Swamped at work, Mom," Adam would say, his voice distracted, the sound of typing in the background. "Big project. I'll call you this weekend." He rarely did. Josh was smoother, but just as distant. "Hey Mom. Things are crazy here. Let's catch up next week for sure." Next week became a ghost, always receding into the future. Visits to my little apartment, once a bi-weekly ritual, became a negotiated chore. When they did come, they seemed too big for the space. Their expensive cologne would linger in the air long after they'd left, a phantom of their new lives. They'd look at my worn furniture, the faded floral patterns on my couch, with a kind of polite pity. They'd check their phones constantly, their thumbs flying across glass screens, their minds a million miles away. They weren't my boys anymore. They were visitors, tourists in the life of the woman who had built theirs. The real shift, the one that cracked the foundation of my world, happened on a Tuesday in early November. It was my birthday. I turned 62. I didn't expect a party, but I hoped for dinner. I called them. Adam sighed into the phone. "Mom, I'm buried in quarterly reports. I can't possibly get away." Josh was more apologetic, but the result was the same. "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry, it completely slipped my mind. My fiancée, Jessica, we have this thing with her parents tonight. It's unavoidable." I told them it was okay. I told them I understood. I hung up the phone and the silence rushed back in, louder than ever. I ate a slice of grocery store cake by myself at my small kitchen table. The frosting was too sweet, and it felt like grit in my mouth. The following Saturday, they called with a sudden, coordinated cheerfulness. "Hey Mom, we're coming over. Bringing some late birthday drinks." They arrived around 8, a bottle of expensive whiskey in a gift bag. It wasn't my drink, but I appreciated the gesture. Or I tried to. They poured themselves generous glasses, the ice clinking like tiny, cold bells. They sat on my couch, their long legs stretched out, looking utterly out of place. They asked me perfunctory questions about my week, but their eyes were glazed over. They were fulfilling an obligation. After about an hour, Josh's phone buzzed. He and Adam exchanged a look. "Hey Mom, I gotta take this," Josh said, standing up. "Work stuff." Adam followed him. "Yeah, me too. We'll just step out onto the porch." The porch was small, right off the living room. The door didn't close properly. It had a slight gap, a flaw I'd always meant to fix. I stayed at the kitchen sink, rinsing out my teacup, pretending not to listen. But their voices carried on the crisp night air, sharp and clear. At first, it was about work. Then about Jessica, Josh's fiancée, and her expensive tastes. And then, Josh's voice dropped a little. "Seriously though, what are we going to do about this?" This. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that this was me. Adam's reply was a low chuckle, devoid of any warmth. "I know. This place is depressing. Every time I come here, I feel like I need to wash the poverty off me." My hand froze on the teacup. My knuckles were white. Josh sighed. "She's practically broke, man. All those years working like a dog at that hospital, and what does she have to show for it? Nothing. She's probably going to start asking us for money soon. Jessica is already freaking out about it, thinking she'll be our financial burden." A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I couldn't breathe. I stood there, paralyzed, a statue in my own kitchen. And then Adam said the word. The word that changed everything. The word that became the architect of my revenge. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice dripping with a casual, dismissive arrogance. "She's helpless. She doesn't know the first thing about money or managing her life. When she can't pay her bills, we'll just find some cheap, state-funded retirement place and stick her in it. Out of sight, out of mind. Helpless. The word didn't just sting. It detonated. It shattered the carefully constructed image I had of myself, of my life, of my sons. The years of sacrifice, the sold jewelry, the cashed-out retirement, the endless double shifts, they all collapsed into a pile of meaningless rubble at the feet of that one single word. They saw my love not as a gift, but as a symptom of my incompetence. They saw my sacrifice not as strength, but as a weakness to be managed. I wasn't their mother. I was a problem to be solved. A future expense to be minimized. The world went silent. I couldn't hear the hum of the refrigerator. I couldn't hear the distant traffic. All I could hear was that word, echoing in the cavern of my skull. Helpless. 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 When they came back inside, their faces were arranged in masks of dutiful affection. "Sorry about that, Mom," Josh said, flashing a brilliant, empty smile. "So, another drink?" I turned from the sink. The rage I felt was a white-hot furnace, but I didn't let a single spark show. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't confront them with their own monstrous cruelty. Instead, a strange, terrifying calm settled over me. Something inside me had broken, yes, but in its place, something cold and hard and infinitely strong was beginning to form. I smiled. A small, serene smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, thank you, boys. I'm a little tired. But it was so good of you to come." They left soon after, relieved to have checked the box of their filial duty. I locked the door behind them and leaned against it, the cheap wood cool against my back. I didn't fall apart. I didn't weep for the love I had lost. I stood there in the echoing silence of my apartment and made a new vow. They thought I was helpless. They had no idea who I was about to become. They had just declared war on their own mother, and they didn't even know it. The first rule of combat is to never underestimate your enemy. And they had just made the biggest miscalculation of their entire lives. Part 2. The Education of a Ghost. The days that followed that conversation were a masterclass in deception. On the outside, I was the same Deborah. I called them on Sundays, my voice carefully pitched to sound cheerful and slightly dottery. I'd ask about their work, about Jessica, about the weather. I listened to their thinly veiled excuses for why they couldn't visit, and I'd say, "Oh, of course, honey. I understand completely. You're so busy." I became a ghost in my own life, my real self receding into the shadows while a harmless, smiling phantom went through the motions. But at night, when the pretense could be dropped, the real work began. The word helpless was my fuel. It was the stone in my shoe that I pressed on with every step, reminding me of my purpose. My first revelation was how little I actually knew about their lives. I knew their job titles, but not their salaries. I knew they lived in fancy apartments, but I didn't know if they were renting or drowning in a mortgage. I knew Josh's fiancée, Jessica, wore designer clothes, but I didn't know whose credit card was paying for them. They had built a wall of success around themselves, and I was on the outside. To them, my ignorance was proof of my helplessness. To me, it now represented a strategic blind spot I had to illuminate. My quest for knowledge began not in a library or a lawyer's office, but in my own memories. I thought back over years of conversations, searching for discarded clues. A stray comment from Adam about a brutal business loan. A stressed sigh from Josh about keeping Jessica happy. These were the breadcrumbs. The disrespect didn't stop, it escalated, emboldened by my perceived passivity. For Thanksgiving, they invited me to Adam's apartment in the city. It was the first time I'd seen it. The place was sterile, all chrome and glass and grey furniture, looking more like a corporate lobby than a home. Jessica was there, a woman so polished she seemed to have been buffed. She greeted me with a kiss that didn't quite land on my cheek. I had spent 2 days baking my famous pumpkin pie from scratch, the one they used to fight over as boys. I brought it in, holding it like an offering. Jessica looked at the pie in my hands, a tiny, perfect wrinkle of distaste appearing between her sculpted eyebrows. "Oh, how rustic," she said. "I already have a gluten-free, dairy-free, artisanal pumpkin tart from a little bakery in Soho. We can put yours in the kitchen, just in case." It sat on the counter all evening, untouched. During dinner, They talked about their stock portfolios, about a trip to Aspen they were planning, about friends I'd never met. They spoke in a language of acronyms and brand names designed to exclude me. At one point, trying to join the conversation, I mentioned a funny story about a patient at the hospital. Adam cut me off mid-sentence. "Mom, please. Let's not talk about bedpans and sick people at the dinner table. It's a little grim." He said it with a laugh, as if it were a joke, but the message was clear: your world is small and unpleasant. Keep it to yourself. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, even though there were only 4 of us at the table. I felt my face flush with a heat that was pure shame. The old Deborah would have shrunk. She would have apologized. The new Deborah simply took a slow sip of her water, the condensation cold against her fingers, and filed the moment away. It was another piece of evidence. Another log on the fire. Leaving that night, I hugged them both. Adam gave me a stiff, one-armed pat on the back. Josh's hug was just air. As I walked down the long, silent hallway to the elevator, I could feel their eyes on my back. I didn't need to hear them to know what they were thinking. Helpless. Old. A burden. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in my dark living room, the city lights of my own, much smaller town twinkling outside. I looked at the photos on my mantelpiece. 2 smiling little boys in matching striped sweaters, gaps in their teeth. Where did they go? When did the love curdle into contempt? Was it my fault? Did I give so much of myself that there was nothing left for them to respect? The questions were a kind of torture. For a fleeting moment, I felt a wave of despair so profound it threatened to drown me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was helpless. Maybe this fire in my belly was just the last, sputtering flame of a dying woman's pride. I could just let it go. I could accept my fate, fade into the background, and wait for the inevitable placement in that cheap retirement home. I closed my eyes. The image of the untouched pumpkin pie flashed in my mind. The condescending smirk on Adam's face. The word. Helpless. No. Despair was a luxury I couldn't afford. It was what they expected. My helplessness was a key part of their plan. And I would be damned if I was going to play my assigned role in the sad little drama they had written for me. The next morning, I made a phone call that changed the entire trajectory of my life. I dug through an old box of paperwork until I found it, a discharge summary for a patient I had cared for 5 years ago. A man named Arthur Henderson. He'd come in with a severe heart arrhythmia, a man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed even in a hospital gown. He had been a debt collector his whole life. A buyer of distressed assets. I remembered him because he was sharp and cynical, but we'd formed a strange bond during his recovery. He told me I was the only person in the hospital who looked at him like a human being instead of a vampire. He'd given me his card when he left. "If you ever need to understand the dirty business of money," he'd said with a wink, "give me a call." My fingers trembled as I dialed the number. I half expected it to be disconnected. But after 3 rings, a gruff, familiar voice answered. "Henderson." "Mr. Henderson," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "This is Deborah Miller. I was your nurse at St. Jude's a few years ago." There was a pause. I thought he'd hung up. Then, a low chuckle. "Nurse Miller. The one who told me my bedside manner was worse than my EKG. Of course, I remember you. To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you've finally decided to take up loan sharking." The joke, so close to the truth, caught me off guard. I took a breath. "Something like that," I said, my voice finding its strength. "I need some advice. I need to learn about debt. Specifically, how to buy it." Another pause, longer this time. The silence on the line was heavy with unspoken questions. I could picture him in his office, leaning back in a leather chair, stroking his chin. He wasn't a man who wasted his time. I expected him to politely brush me off. But his reply was not what I expected at all. "Deborah," he said, his voice losing its jocular tone and becoming serious, almost gentle. "The only people who want to learn how to buy other people's debt are either very greedy or very angry. Judging by the sound of your voice, I'm guessing you're not the greedy type." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. It was the first time in months that someone had seen past the smiling, helpless facade. "I need to understand," I said, the words catching in my throat. "I need to know how it all works. The dirtier, the better." He was quiet for a moment more. I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. "All right, Nurse Miller. Meet me for coffee tomorrow. 10 a.m. The diner on Elm Street. My treat." He was about to hang up, but then he added one more thing, a sentence that felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. "And listen," he said, his voice a low growl of complicity. "What you're describing, it doesn't sound like you're planning a crime. It sounds like you're planning to balance a scale. There's a difference. I'll see you tomorrow." He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. A scale. He was right. This wasn't just about anger anymore. This wasn't about lashing out. A profound sense of clarity washed over me. This was about justice. The cold, impartial, mathematical justice of the balance sheet. My sons had made me feel worthless, like a zero. I was about to learn the language of numbers, and with it, I would teach them a lesson in accounting they would never, ever forget. The education of Deborah Miller had officially begun. Part 3, the Master's Class in Financial Warfare. The diner on Elm Street was a relic, smelling of fried bacon and old coffee. Arthur Henderson was already there, tucked into a corner booth. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were just as sharp, missing nothing. He had a newspaper spread out before him, but he folded it neatly as I approached. "Nurse Miller," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "You look like a woman on a mission." I slid into the worn vinyl seat opposite him. "I look like a tired old woman, Arthur. Let's not romanticize it." He chuckled. "Fair enough." A waitress came over, and he ordered 2 black coffees without asking me. "Now," he said, leaning forward and lacing his fingers together on the table, "tell me who you want to ruin and why." His directness was like a splash of cold water. There was no judgment, only a pragmatic curiosity. And so, I told him. I didn't give him the whole tearful story, just the facts. The sacrifices. The overheard conversation. The single, damning word, helpless. He listened intently, his gaze never leaving my face. He didn't interrupt. He just absorbed the story, nodding slowly. When I finished, he took a long, slow sip of his coffee. "Children," he finally said, with the weariness of a man who had seen the worst of human nature. "They're the most creative creditors on earth. They'll take everything you have and still feel like you owe them more." He looked me dead in the eye. "So, you want to buy their debt? It's an elegant solution. Poetic, even. But it's not simple. You'll be swimming with sharks, Deborah, and you don't even know how to float yet." That was the beginning of my apprenticeship. Over the next year, Arthur Henderson became my unlikely mentor. We met every week in that same diner booth. He was a ruthless teacher. He brought me textbooks on finance, articles on debt securitization, printouts of case law. He taught me the vocabulary of this new world: non-performing loans, secondary markets, asset-backed securities, wage garnishment orders. My apartment, once a quiet sanctuary of loneliness, transformed into a war room. I pinned flowcharts to my walls. I covered my kitchen table with legal pads filled with my spidery handwriting, trying to decipher the complex web of modern finance. I spent hours in the public library, using their computers to research shell corporations and the process of becoming a licensed debt purchaser. My mind, which I feared had grown soft and slow, felt like it was coming alive again. The exhaustion from my hospital shifts was replaced by a new kind of energy, a humming, focused intensity. Arthur was my guide through this labyrinth. First rule, he'd grumble over a plate of eggs. "Never use your own name. We'll set up an LLC. Something boring. Midland Strategic Holdings. Something that sounds like it's in a glass tower in Delaware, not a 2-bedroom apartment over a laundromat." He introduced me to a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense young woman named Ms. Albright. She specialized in contract law and collections. I sat in her sleek, minimalist office, feeling utterly out of place in my nurse's uniform. I gave her the sanitized version of the story, I was an investor looking to enter the distressed debt market. She didn't pry. She was interested in the legal puzzle, not the emotional one. For a hefty retainer, paid for with the last of my emergency savings, she set up the LLC and became its registered agent. I was insulated, a ghost in the machine. The next step was the hardest: funding. Buying debt, even bad debt, requires capital. And my son's debts, I was beginning to learn, were substantial. Arthur advised me to start gathering intelligence. "You're their mother," he said. "Use it. You have access no private investigator could ever get." So I played the part of the doting, clueless mother with renewed vigor. During a strained visit to Josh's apartment, while he and Jessica were in the other room arguing about caterers for their wedding, I saw a stack of mail on their counter. My heart pounded. With trembling fingers, I quickly sorted through it. Bills. Credit card statements from 3 different high-interest lenders, all with staggering balances. A letter from a luxury car dealership about a late payment. I pulled out my phone and, my hands shaking so badly I could barely focus, I took pictures of the account numbers and the creditor addresses. It felt like a profound violation, a betrayal of a mother's trust. But then I remembered the words spoken on my porch, and the guilt evaporated, replaced by cold resolve. Adam was harder. He was more private, more meticulous. But he had an ego. During one of my carefully orchestrated Sunday calls, I asked him about his business, feigning motherly interest. "Oh, it sounds so complicated. You're so brilliant, honey. Are you the sole owner? That's so impressive." He preened, just as I knew he would. "Of course, Mom. I built it from the ground up. I took out a huge SBA-backed loan to get it started. The banks were lining up to invest in me." SBA-backed loan. That was the key. Those loans were subject to public filings. Ms. Albright found the details in less than a day. It was a significant 6-figure loan, and a quick check of the public payment records showed that while he wasn't in default yet, his payments had been late 3 times in the last year. He was teetering on the edge. His entire empire of chrome and glass was built on a foundation of crumbling sand. Now I had the targets. But I still needed the ammunition. The money. My savings were gone. My 401k was a ghost. All I had was my small apartment, which I owned outright. I could sell it, but where would I live? It felt like a dead end. The answer came from a place of grief. My own mother had passed away a decade earlier, leaving me her tiny, run-down house in a neighboring state. I'd never had the heart or the money to fix it up or sell it, so I'd just paid the minimal property taxes on it year after year. It was a forgotten asset, a relic of a past life. My sons didn't even know it existed. With Arthur's guidance, I sold the house through an out-of-state agent. It wasn't a windfall, but after fees and taxes, I was left with a sum of just over $80,000. It was a sacred, sorrowful treasure, money born from my own mother's lifetime of hard work. The irony was almost too much to bear. The money from the grandmother they barely remembered would be the instrument of their reckoning. I transferred the funds into the bank account for Midland Strategic Holdings LLC. The ghost now had a war chest. The waiting was the hardest part. Arthur taught me patience. "You can't just walk up and buy a specific loan," he explained. "That's not how it works. These lenders, they bundle their bad debts into portfolios. Packages of non-performing assets. We have to wait until your son's accounts are sold off. They have to default, or get close to it. Then, we wait for their debt to appear on the secondary market." So I waited. And I watched. I saw the strain on Josh's face grow deeper as his wedding approached. I heard the forced confidence in Adam's voice when he talked about his business, a brittle edge that hadn't been there before. They were drowning, and in their arrogance, they never once thought to turn to their helpless mother for a lifeline. Then, 6 months later, I got the call from Arthur. "It's time," he said, his voice grim. "Josh's credit card debt. All 3 cards. They've been charged off, bundled with 1,000 other pieces of junk, and sold to a mid-tier collection agency. That agency is now chopping up the portfolio and selling it off in smaller tranches. Ms. Albright has an inside track. We can make a bid." We had one shot. Ms. Albright, acting on behalf of my anonymous LLC, put in a bid for the entire tranche that contained Josh's accounts. We had to buy 100 other people's misery just to get to his. We offered 4 cents on the dollar. The price was $72,000. It would take almost every penny I had. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the phone, my coffee going cold. Was this real? Was I really about to become the legal owner of my son's financial ruin? The phone rang just after 9 the next morning. It was Ms. Albright. Her voice was flat, professional. "Good morning, Deborah. The bid was accepted. The transfer will be finalized by the end of the week. Congratulations. You are now a creditor." I hung up the phone. A wave of something I couldn't name washed over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't glee. It was a profound, chilling, and deeply satisfying sense of power. I walked over to my desk and picked up the pen I had used to sign away my retirement. The plastic felt different in my hand now. It was no longer an instrument of sacrifice. It was a weapon. I had signed away my future for them once. Now, with the stroke of another pen, the transfer of a wire, I was about to buy theirs. Adam's loan was still out there, but I had my first victory. One down, one to go. Part 4, The Reckoning and the Receipt. Owning Josh's debt was a strange, silent power. For weeks, nothing happened. I was just a name on a digital file in some remote server, Midland Strategic Holdings, a phantom creditor. Josh had no idea. He continued his life, planning his lavish wedding, oblivious to the fact that the financial ground beneath his feet had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer beholden to a faceless bank. He was beholden to me. During this time, my focus shifted entirely to Adam. His business loan was a much larger, more complex beast. It hadn't been sold off yet. He was still making payments, barely. He was what Arthur called a struggling performer. I needed him to fall. It was a monstrous thought, to wish for my own son's failure. But the memory of his voice on that porch, dripping with contempt, was all the justification I needed. I wasn't wishing for his ruin, I was waiting for the consequences of his own arrogance to come due. The trigger, ironically, was Josh's wedding. It was an obscenely expensive affair, a gaudy spectacle designed for social media. Jessica, in a dress that cost more than my car, floated through the reception while Josh stood beside her, his smile stretched thin, a mask of pure terror in his eyes. I saw Adam pull him aside near the bar. I was too far away to hear, but their body language was electric with panic. Adam was gesturing wildly. Josh looked like he was going to be sick. Later, I learned from a stray comment by a tipsy bridesmaid that Adam had been a major investor in the wedding, loaning Josh a huge sum to cover the deposits, money his own business couldn't afford to lose. It was a classic case of the arrogant leading the blind. That loan to Josh was the final straw for Adam's fragile finances. 2 months after the wedding, he missed a payment on his SBA loan. Then he missed a second. The default notices started. And just as Arthur had predicted, the bank, unwilling to deal with a messy collection, decided to cut its losses. They packaged Adam's defaulted loan with a few other small business disasters and put it up for auction on a private debt exchange. This time was different. It was an auction. Ms. Albright explained that we would be bidding against other, much larger firms who did this for a living. My $80,000 was long gone on Josh's debt. I had nothing left to bid with. My only remaining asset was my apartment. The one they called depressing. The one they couldn't wait to get me out of. I didn't hesitate. I took out a mortgage. I walked into the same bank where I'd signed away my retirement and, with a steady hand, I signed papers that put my own home on the line. I was leveraging the roof over my head for a chance to own my son's future. The bank approved a line of credit for $60,000. It was a desperate, all-in gamble. The auction was a blind electronic bid. Ms. Albright and I were on the phone as she submitted our offer from her office. We bid 12 cents on the dollar for Adam's loan. It was a higher percentage, but it was a more secure debt. It was everything I had. "The bid is in," she said, her voice calm as ever. "Now we wait." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. My entire life, my home, my security, my entire plan, was hanging in the balance. If we lost the bid, I would be in debt myself, with nothing to show for it. I would truly be helpless. After what felt like an eternity, an email chimed on Ms. Albright's computer. I heard her sharp intake of breath. "We got it," she whispered, a crack in her professional armor. "Deborah, we got it. The loan is yours." I slumped back in my chair in my little kitchen, the phone pressed hard against my ear. I had done it. Midland Strategic Holdings was now the legal creditor for both of my sons. The architect of their success was now the arbiter of their failure. I owned their student loans from years ago, which I had paid off but never legally released them from. I owned their credit card debt. I owned their business loans. I owned every poor decision, every arrogant purchase, every desperate lie they had told to maintain their facade of success. It was time to send the letters. Ms. Albright drafted them. They were cold, legal, and utterly terrifying. Official letters of notification, sent via certified mail, informing Adam Miller and Joshua Miller that their outstanding debts had been legally purchased by a private equity firm, Midland Strategic Holdings LLC. The letters detailed the total balances, the defaulted statuses, and the new payment terms. All future payments were to be directed to a new address, a P.O. box I had opened in a neighboring town. And under the advisement of Ms. Albright, we included the kill shot. Due to the nature of the defaults, we would be petitioning the court for an immediate order of wage garnishment, as was our legal right. I mailed them on a Monday. They arrived on Wednesday. On Thursday evening, my apartment door buzzer shrieked with a violent, sustained blast. I looked through the peephole. It was both of them. Their faces were pale, contorted with a mixture of fury and disbelief. I calmly pressed the button to let them in. They stormed up the stairs, not even waiting for me to open the door fully before pushing their way inside. Adam was in the lead, his fists clenched, a crumpled letter clutched in his hand. Josh stumbled in behind him, looking utterly broken. "Mom, what the hell is this?" Adam snarled, shaking the paper in my face. "Some kind of sick joke? You own our loans? Midland Strategic Holdings? We called them, and the number goes to our lawyer, Ms. Albright, who says she can only speak to our legal counsel." I walked past them to the kitchen, my movements slow and deliberate. I picked up the coffee pot and poured myself a mug. My hand was perfectly steady. I turned to face them. They stood in the middle of my small living room, two giants brought to their knees. The expensive cologne, the tailored suits, it all seemed like a cheap costume now. "It's not a joke, Adam," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the room like a crack of thunder. "Yes. I own your loans. Every paycheck you make from now on, a portion comes directly to me. Court approved. Legal. Ironclad." Josh's face went from pale to ghostly white. He sank onto my worn floral sofa, the one they had pitted, and put his head in his hands. "Mom, how?" he whispered. "Why? You can't do this." Adam roared, his voice cracking. "You're our mother. This is insane." I took a sip of my coffee. The warmth spread through my chest. I finally looked him square in the eye. The cold, hard thing that had been growing inside me for a year was now in complete control. "Oh, but I already have," I replied, my voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. "I can do this because you taught me how. You taught me that our relationship wasn't about love or family. It was a transaction. You took what you needed, my money, my time, my future, and when the account was empty, you decided to write me off." I set my mug down on the counter with a soft click. "You stood on my porch, not 10 feet from where you are now, and you called me helpless. You laughed about putting me in a cheap home. You decided my worth, and you found it to be zero. So, I decided to learn a new kind of math. The kind you understand." I let the silence hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Adam stared at me, his rage beginning to curdle into horrified understanding. "The money. Where did you get the money?" "I sold my mother's house," I said softly. "The house your grandmother left me. Money that might have been yours someday. And I took out a mortgage on this depressing little apartment. I gambled everything I had left." Josh looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. "Mom, we're so sorry." "No," I cut him off, the word like a blade. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry the helpless woman you planned to discard turned out to have a mind of her own." I walked over to my desk and picked up a neatly printed payment schedule. I held it out to Adam. "This is your new reality. You will pay me on time, every month. You will not default. If you need an extension, you will call me and you will ask for it, respectfully. Your futures, the ones you were so proud of, now run through me. Every promotion you get, every bonus you earn, I get my piece first. You wanted me out of your lives? Well, congratulations. I am now permanently on your balance sheets." Adam just stared at the paper, his hands trembling. He couldn't bring himself to take it. "You called me helpless," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but with an intensity that made them both flinch. "But you were the ones who were truly helpless. Drowning in debt to impress people you don't even like. And in your arrogance, you made your greatest creditor the one person who knew all your weaknesses. You didn't just make me angry. You made me the owner of your paychecks." Resolution and reflection. That night was the beginning of their education. The first payments arrived 2 weeks later. Just anonymous electronic transfers appearing in the bank account of Midland Strategic Holdings. There was no joy in seeing the money. Instead, there was a quiet, profound sense of order restored. A scale, balanced. Their lives changed. Josh and Jessica had to cancel their honeymoon to Aspen. They sold the luxury car. Adam had to lay off 2 employees and move his business to a smaller, less prestigious office. The facade they had built so carefully came crashing down. "They have to talk to me now." Not with the breezy dismissal of before, but with the cautious respect you'd show a bank manager. Last month, Adam's car broke down. He had to call me, his voice choked with humiliation, to ask if he could defer half his payment for 2 weeks. I listened silently, asked for the details of the repair bill, and then I approved it. The power in that single, quiet approved, was more potent than any screaming match could ever be. The neighbors in my building whisper. They see my sons visiting now, not with gift bags and fake smiles, but with envelopes and strained expressions. They see them leaving, looking smaller than when they arrived. They say I have them under my thumb. They're not wrong. I haven't decided what I'll do with the money. Maybe I'll finally take that trip to see the ocean from a balcony. Or maybe I'll just let it sit in the account, a silent testament to the lesson they are learning every single day. They destroyed the mother who would have given them the world. In her place, they created a creditor who will settle for nothing less than exactly what she is owed. They taught me that there are 2 kinds of debt in this world: the financial, which can be quantified on a spreadsheet, and the emotional, which can only be paid back in kind. And my sons, Adam and Josh, are now making regular court-ordered payments on both. Gratitude, it turns out, isn't optional. It's a debt. And I am no longer helpless. I am the collector. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt like your sacrifices went unseen, let me know in the comments below. We all have a story, and sometimes, sharing them is the first step to balancing the scales. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of long-awaited justice. Until next time, remember, never, ever let anyone call you helpless.